Hello, and welcome to the Science Fiction and Fantasy Marketing Podcast, the show where we help you establish your author brand, increase the size of your audience, and sell more books. I'm Joe Lalo, and I'm here with my two co-hosts.
I'm Jeff Poole.
And I'm Lindsay Baroker, traveling on the road, so handing the main hosting job over to Joe today.
That's right. Today we are going to be interviewing James R. Tramontana. He is a writer, a rocker, and a nerd, and a nice guy. His notable victories include winning a ghost chili eating contest, a fight with an entire toga party, and a mime competition. He is the author of the Ace Tucker Space Trucker series, which he also produces in audio and puts out as a fiction podcast. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Thanks. How you guys doing today?
Doing pretty good, Lindsay.
Enjoying the warm weather here. Cannot complain.
Mr. Arizona, a state I'm not in currently. All right, but let's make this about James. Are you James or Jim? Do you prefer?
Well, my authorial name is James, but yeah, I'll answer to James, Jimmy. That's a funny thing about James is no matter what you tell somebody your name is, they're going to shorten it anyway. Like I'll introduce myself as James or Jim, and people will just call me Jimmy or Jaime. So whatever you prefer.
All right, well, I'll try to remember. One of those. You should have a middle name like Tiberius. I could remember that.
Yeah, James T. Kirk. I wish.
Yep.
My middle name is Robert, which isn't that exciting, but you could. So I guess
all right.
I was raised in the South, so no one. I got called Jim Bob a lot, but yeah.
That's always a good one. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got started writing and publishing?
Well, I got my first novel, Ace Tucker Space Trucker, came out last year. Well, this year, February 2018. But I simultaneously released the novel with an audio fiction podcast where I kind of using it as a marketing and promotional tool where I cut up the novel into a 17 episode audio fiction series where I do all the voices, all the characters, all the music, all the sound design. And so kind of trying to make an immersive experience to kind of get people interested in the run up to the novel since it was my first. And based on all the information I've seen on the internet is your first novel is going to do terrible anyway. So I figured why not have fun with it? So that's kind of how the series has started. And the podcast has actually overtaken the novel now. But the second season just came out where I'm taking short stories and doing them as an audio fiction, audio first, and then going into the prose version secondary. So I really have no idea what I'm doing. So it's all a grand experiment. So that's the 5 cent tour.
Was your background in audio stuff? I know we said musician, so that
yeah. I've been in bands since I've been about 16. So yeah, I've been around recording studios pretty much my whole life. So what I wanted to do, like, I got all that advice is you need a platform, especially if you're doing nonfiction, but some fiction authors are always like, build a platform, build your online platform. So instead of doing like the whole like teaching how to write. I mean, I have a master's degree in mass comm and a creative writing undergrad, but I work in IT. So I kind of decided to use some of my like IT and web experience and blend it with the audio and blend it with the creative writing and kind of just put that all in a blender. So did that answer the question? I feel like I went around a big tree there. Oh, your question was about audio experience. So yeah.
Yeah. Did you know what you were doing?
Did I? No, I have no idea what I'm doing. So, but yeah, I know how to use Pro Tools. I've worked in recording studios as a musician, as a recording engineer, part-time. So yeah, I kind of invented as I go along to kind of create like an old-timey radio kind of experience with sound effects and different voices and, panning and effects. So I guess I do know what I'm doing. So yeah.
For those authors that might be listening and thinking this is something that sounds fun and they would like to do it, how exactly are you like uploading it? Are you doing like a podcast on iTunes and the other sites, like a chapter each week or something like that?
Yeah. So the first novel, I did a chapter per week. I released 3 right off the bat to kind of get people hooked, and then did a chapter 1 week at a time. up until it culminated. Then I took a long break because it's a lot of work. It takes me like 40 hours per episode to do. And I have a full-time job. So if I was doing this full time, I could probably put them out a little quicker than that, because now that that first season is ended, I'm doing once a month. So I kind of branded a comic book for your ears. So each episode is its own self-contained short story, but it's telling an overall seasonal arc, kind of like a season of like a serial like Star Trek or something, where each episode is a self-contained story. The first season was a complete serial, so it had like, if you missed one, you would be a little lost. So yeah, I'm kind of experimenting now to do it a little differently and trying to kind of see what people are into a little, like if they prefer one versus the other. Like I said, it's an experiment. I don't know.
Absolutely.
But you did ask about where I release it. Yeah, so it's available. There's a censored version that's available on all the regular podcatchers like iTunes and Google Play and Stitcher, and then the uncensored version, which is available on through my website, through Patreon, and through the first season is available through Audible. And I'm going to start using Findaway Voices. Have you heard of them for audiobooks? I'm going to start doing those for more wide distribution of the audio first content.
Cool. All right. So one thing, like you mentioned music and sound design, like we're obviously fairly familiar with audiobooks. Most of the people who have been writing for a while have had some experience with them, but music and sound design are not usually a part of audiobooks. So
Right.
like what sort of scope are we talking about here?
We're talking full cinematic. So I use all the music from my bands, my friends' bands, and I do some custom scoring on the fly, like mostly MIDI instruments. That sounds pretty much like it's like a low budget movie scoring kind of a sound. So one of my inspirations was, I don't know if you've ever heard the audiobook of World War Z, where they had a bunch of different actors doing the short stories, and there were some sound effects real light, but I wanted to take it up a notch and kind of go to like a Flash Gordon, the Shadow from like the 20s kind of feel, even the old Superman original radio plays, where you got the cloppity 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 sound effects, but I'm using like Hollywood style sound effects for like a movie for your ears. That's kind of what I'm going for. So it's more intense than like your standard audiobook. So a lot of people seem to like it, but if it's not a straight read of the novel. But there's a special version coming out that will be that, but it's special in that it's not as exciting because it's just reading. So
it's a fun thing. Like this is not something that typically becomes useful for writing people, but the full dramatic sound design version is different rights than the standard read. Like a lot of people who like this is not going to be useful for anybody, but if you have sold the rights to your standard narrated audiobook, you can do the full sound design version separately as even if it's exclusive. It's a weird little fact.
Yeah. And I haven't done both versions yet, but mostly because it's so time consuming and I'm a one-man operation. But yeah, it's got to exploit all those rights, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is like full length, like this is what you get in the book, you get in the thing, or is there any bonus material? Like how's that go?
Yeah, so the first season was it's kind of like I would call it a special edition, because it is kind of a bonus experience, because it's more of a cinematic interpretation of the novel. The dialogue is pretty much ripped straight from the pages, but the descriptions are more immediate and more fleshed out. The novel is told in third person past tense, whereas the audio fiction is more immediate. It's not first person, but it's present tense. So you're getting a different kind of experience than you would through the prose. And then as far as bonus material, I've done some funny little, like I did a Christmas special last year where Santa Claus fights Krampus in space. It was fantastic. um, and yeah, so I'm doing that. That's kind of where, like, my first idea was this was going to be just a series of novels, but the audio fiction has kind of taken on a life of its own. So so I'm kind of taking it into audio first, and that's where it's kind of like I'm treading in like weird water. I don't really know how the experience is going to pan out. So let that be a lesson. Experimentation is fun, but I have no idea what I'm doing.
So before I ask my question, I have a couple of additional questions that sprang to mind as I'm listening to your intro and everything.
Mhm.
Did I hear that right? Ghost chili contest there. Refresh my memory, the Scoville unit associated with the ghost chili?
It's a couple million. I'll have to look it up for the exact Scoville unit, but I have won 2 ghost chili eating contests.
I was going to
So,
say, what was alcohol involved in the decision to make to do these things?
well, now and in the matter of full disclosure, they were both by forfeit. So it's still a win, though. My opponent forfeit, but it doesn't say how many or how. It just says how many, and I have 2 W's in my column. So
If you put that thing in your mouth, you chewed and swallowed. Good God Almighty, Friday, you deserve to win it there.
It was there. It was going ready, and the guy forfeited. So, and then the same thing happened. Now, once I did it once, I was like, I'm going to try this again and see if I can continue my winning streak. And sure enough, so no money was on the line.
Have you ever eaten? I got curiosity. Have you eaten one of these things ever? These ghost chilies?
No. I've tasted ghost pepper sauce that's made with them, but no, I've never put a full pepper in my mouth. So.
Okay, so regarding that audiobook with all the enhanced sound effects and everything, you touched on it briefly. I'm curious, how much longer does it take to make one of those versus just a normal standard audiobook? Because it's got to be involved.
Yeah, it's pretty intense. So yeah, I do narration on the side for other authors, and I just finished a paranormal romance that hasn't come out yet, so I can't really talk about it. But that that was like a 400-page novel, and that took me maybe 20 hours, whereas each episode of my Ace Tucker Space Trucker series takes me about 40 hours for a 26-minute episode. So it's a lot more involved, and it's probably because I kind of make up my process as I go, and there's a lot of nitpicking, and I'm a control freak. But my philosophy is if it sounds good, it is good, but it still takes me that long to get it to sound good. So yeah, it's pretty intensive, but it's a lot of fun. So that's why I stick with it.
Right. So, as I say, we often hear of many podcasters who host or participate in a variety of podcasts. I was wondering, have you ever considered starting another podcast?
Actually, I do have a second podcast called Idiots with Instruments. So it's me and my band, Red Hot Rebellion, as we're writing and recording our new album. We started as just kind of as a expose on our kooky creative process, but then it turned into an interview show where we started actually interviewing like real producers and engineers and even some famous musicians. And we did a 30-episode run that just ended this past November. We're taking the holidays off. Then we're going to kick it up again. And one of the reasons is because I've kicked Ace Tucker Space Trucker back up, and that's so time consuming that I've had to drop off the second podcast. But yeah, I kind of have the podcast bug, so I see why you guys stick with it. It's a fun experience, and especially when you get to talk to crazy people, it's a lot of fun. So look for it, Idiots with Instruments. Ask for it by name.
You'll probably get another chance to plug that toward the end.
All right.
All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about, this is humorous sci-fi, as the title would sort of indicate.
Mm-hmm.
And unlike a lot of the other subgenres of sci-fi, there's not a whole lot of classics in humorous sci-fi. The only one that I can think of off the top of my head is Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which I believe started as a radio drama. So
right.
What were your influences for what you're writing?
Yeah, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is a big one. Oddly enough, a lot of movies, like one of my early influences for this project was Big Trouble in Little China. Although this series, I guess it has a little bit of it because the protagonist is kind of like an idiot fallen into this operatic adventure, and he doesn't really know what's going on, much like the old Kurt Russell's character. Why can't I remember? Oh, Jack Burton. Jack Burton in Big Trouble.
Also a trucker.
Also a trucker. See, there's a common theme here. So Yeah, also trucker movies, a lot of campy sci-fi. But yeah, as far as straight novels, yeah, Douglas Adams was a huge one. Good Omens, the Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. I mean, that's more supernatural, but that kind of I don't think I'm as witty as a Brit, but there are some goofy humor in there. So if you take like old timey, well, not old timey, like British sci-fi humor, mix it with trucker movies, and throw in a little dash of alcohol and a cyborg Russian chimp and Elvis Presley for the rock and roll, that's where I'm coming from. So
that's awesome. Yeah. By the way, that movie, Big Trouble in Little China, Pork Chop Express, absolutely love it.
Yeah, it's a classic.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I always enjoy meeting people who infuse a lot of humor in the work, since I like to do the same. So my question was the addition of humor to your sci-fi writing, had you planned on doing that, or you discover you enjoyed adding little bits of humor in there just to try and keep the tone light?
Yeah, it was a little of both. Like I had to tone it down a little bit because there's still a lot of heart in the story. I didn't want it to be just total slapstick. So, there is like a good hero's journey. And so, he's going through some emotional stuff. There's drama and intrigue and mystery. But I've always been drawn to more comedic stuff. So that was, and then with a title like Ace Tucker, Space Trucker, that it started with the title. So it kind of had to stick with that humorous theme. I don't think if we went like full on like military sci-fi with a title like that, it would go over too well. But yeah, I think
it's one of those titles of books that you really don't want to try and say too fast, just in case something else slips out in there. But
yeah. That's part of the gag too, right?
Well, I was going to mention to you real quick. Did you notice that in Ready Player One, that truck that crashes during the first race, that's the Pork Chop Express?
Yeah, that was awesome. Yeah, that was another book that was somewhat of an influence on me because I don't know. I guess I read that while I was still working on the first novel, so I guess just the nostalgia factor, because there's time travel in Ace Tucker. I mean, Elvis Presley is still alive in it, so and they go back to right before I don't want to give too much away, but Elvis is alive. Big surprise, everybody! Spoiler. There's like a nostalgia factor there in the book. I'm a big fan of like classic punk rock, so there's a lot of that tied into it. So I don't know if I'm riding on the waves of the Ready Player One nostalgia mania, but I would hope that fans of that book would like this. They probably would because it's zany.
All right. Just now, another thing, just sort of on general for sci-fi, we have talked in the past about how sci-fi audiences, more so than many audiences, can be kind of harsh on the stuff that does not follow the rules that they expect. And now this is humor, and humor sets its own rules at the beginning. So do you find that you get more, or I guess you'd have to have comparison to know, but do you tend to have people who sort of bug you about the rules that you're following your thing as not being sci-fi?
Yeah, everyone's been real. I haven't got any harsh reviews about that, but I am hard on myself about that. I had elaborate maps because there's like with time travel and spinning off alternate realities, I had to compose elaborate maps to keep it all together to make sure that it made internal logic, because I'm a real stickler for that, especially with science fiction. You can suspend your disbelief only so much, but if things don't make sense in the context of the universe you created, then it's all going to fall apart. So I work really hard to kind of maintain the internal logic, even though it's a silly novel about a space trucker with a Russian cyborg chimp sidekick who's trying to help Elvis save the galaxy. It still has to make sense within that universe. So yeah, and the way I knew it was onto something is when my mom read the novel. She's like, "I liked it except for all the time travel." I was like, "Yes." She hates sci-fi, but that means it works. So that was one of my parameters. So
excellent. It's funny how if you write, like anybody who's written time travel, like seriously attempted to write time travel, you stop writing outlines and start writing flow charts because there's loops that go back, and it's really tricky. And I guess it's really a testament to like, as long as your rules are consistent, we talk about this a lot too, as long as you're consistent, then everything is okay. So you can have a zany, wacky thing, but if you put in the effort and follow your own rules, then the book is still sort of a worthwhile sci-fi. I find that interesting.
Yeah, yeah, and I worked really hard to do that because there's some real settings. I mean, it takes place mostly in Memphis, Tennessee, in current times, and then in the late '70s. And I used real landmarks. I mean, Graceland's in it. There's a KFC on Elvis Presley Boulevard that's actually there. So that kind of reality mixed with fantasy and the internal logic of the time travel was real important to me. I went through some historical records and newspapers to kind of get the landmarks right, which is way more work than probably anyone would ever notice. But the one guy who's lived in Memphis his whole life who reads the book is going to nitpick and be like, that wasn't there in '79. So I had to make sure it was. So yeah, I totally pulled the nerd card there by trying to make everything as logical in the zany world that I've created as possible.
That might be an interesting podcast, is getting together all the authors and say, what do your parents think of your books? Because mine would be like, how the hell do you come up with this crap? I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, or have them try to explain the plots of your books. That might be fun.
Exactly. So, all right. So do you engage your fans through any of the social networks? And so are there any you prefer or avoid?
Yeah, I'm kind of a little all over the place. I'm pretty active on Twitter and Instagram. I have a Facebook and a Pinterest, all for Ace Tucker Space Trucker. And for me, I'm at Solid Jim on Twitter and Instagram. I kind of dislike and I both hate and love all of them, because they can be soul sucking, but at the same time, there's a lot of fun stuff you find. I've made some pretty neat connections through Twitter. I made a friend and worked for a record label for a couple of years just from someone I met on Twitter.
Oh, you had to say Twitter.
Yeah. But it is a cesspool. So, I mean, I meticulously cull who I follow and who I block, the blocking and the following and all that. But yeah, it takes so much time. I feel like I'm shouting at a wall most of the time, but since it's part of it's where the eyeballs and the earballs are. So you have to be there as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, very true. Like Twitter is one of those where like MySpace just went away eventually, and I'm not going to be that sad when Twitter goes away. It's useful to me and I enjoy using it, but when it's gone, it'll probably be a net improvement to my overall mindset.
Yeah.
All right, so this is a pretty quick question, but you mentioned earlier that like this is sort of a comic book for your ears, and I checked out your covers, and there's definitely a strong comic book vibe to some of them.
Yeah.
How did you pick out your covers? What was that process like?
So yeah, the covers were done by an artist in Atlanta. His name is Benjamin Landy, and I definitely wanted something kind of pulp, like old 50s 40s pulp mixed with modern comic book, but still kind of a little off. So yeah, the cover was definitely an experiment. I ran it by a couple people. I did some A/B testing. Actually, the one person who gave me the big thumbs up was Chris Fox. He's like, just go ahead and do it. If people like it, who cares? Or if people don't like it, who cares? The people who really like it will like it. So, because I was really worried about it doesn't look like other covers, although since like humorous sci-fi is kind of such a niche, and then trucker sci-fi is a smaller niche. And then Elvis Presley fiction, which there's if you look on Wikipedia, there's like 4 or 5 entries in Elvis Presley in fiction, maybe more than that. So yeah, it does kind of stick out like a sore thumb in the fact that it doesn't look a lot like other covers on like say Amazon, and I have gone back and forth about maybe recovering it and see what that would look like, making something more flashy and modern. So I've turned your quick question into a 5-minute treatise on covers, but it's important, right? I mean, people, you eat with your eyes first, don't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah, they always say you're not supposed to judge a book by its cover, but
People
if you're an
do.
author, that's not true.
Yeah. Yeah.
But okay, so my question, if you weren't writing humorous sci-fi or trucker sci-fi, what else do you see yourself writing?
Actually, I have a YA kind of military sci-fi kind of superhero-y series in the works. So Yeah, I'm pretty much sticking in sci-fi and fantasy. I've written some fantasy, some horror. I write comic books. I've done some indie publishing in comic books. I've had a story. I have 2 stories coming out in an anthology that Russ Wooten is putting out. He's the letterer for the Walking Dead series, the comic book, and he has an anthology called Dark Reaches. So I have like kind of comic. I love writing comic books. I can't draw. I wish I could, and that's kind of where the audio fiction is kind of fallen back on my, because I want to create comic books myself, but since I can't draw, but I can do audio and music, this is kind of and write and act. My acting is terrible, but that's part of the joke. That's kind of how I have to do this, Jeff. This is it. This is all I can do. I have to do it. It's the confluence of all my manias in one. So if I couldn't do this, I would probably just cry.
Wasn't it one of those stand-up comedians like Jeff Foxworthy or something where they were asked the question, if you don't see yourself doing this, what else could you do? And they always like gave examples of old jobs, and they were like, good, I'm not suited for anything else.
Yeah.
So this is what I got to be.
Yep. This is basically it. Yeah. And unfortunately, it's not a job. It's a very, very serious side hustle for me now, but that can change. And with, I think it will. I've got the mindset, I've got the power, and I got the time travel on my side. So we'll talk again in a year, and I'll let you know when I sell the movie rights.
Well, I noticed they recently added a humorous subcategory to fantasy. So if they add one to science fiction in the future, which it seems like there's enough people doing it now that they could, maybe you should be emailing them and asking, I don't know, but you'll be prepared.
Yeah, it'll be me and who's the guy who does Space Team? His books are great.
Brian
yeah,
Hutchinson.
yeah,
We've had him on the show, but I had to think for a
yeah.
second.
Yeah, I can. He's great. So yeah, I would love to team up with him and just take that category over. But I'm very slow. I write very slow, so that's like, I wish I had your superpower, Lindsay. I wish I could just sit down and write 10,000 words at a clip, but I can't.
Well, if I had to narrate an entire book, the music effects and acting and everything, that might slow me down a little bit.
Yeah.
But I do think when you're getting started, especially when you're not writing to market, that doing some of these other things that are less competitive, like I know there's a fewer people doing the podio books, as we were calling them when I got started, you know, and I know like Nathan Lowell did his first series. I think he did like 6 or 8 books, just narrating them before there were even, he didn't even do the ebooks for years, and he did really well with them when they came out. But that was sort of back in, I think he started in like 2008, 2009. Do you feel that it's tougher now? Are there a lot of people podcasting their books?
I don't really know of anybody else doing it. I know of other authors who are, you know, obviously reading their own books for Audible and ACX and that type of thing. But as far as I know, this is I'm sure someone else has done it. I just don't know of anybody else. And so I'm a pioneer.
Well, there used to be quite a few people that did it through the Podio Books site, and I think that's gone away now. And they helped you release it like 1 chapter a week after you did it. Do you know, like, how are people finding your podcast? Because I know when I search for stuff on iTunes, like nonfiction podcasts, it seems to be just based on sort of the title, if there's a match in or the name of the podcast or the name of the episode. I don't know if they actually go through all the show notes to help make matches. I come up short a lot of times.
That's the big glaring thumb or what do you call it? Splinter in the thumb of podcasts right now is search is terrible. But I just read today that Pandora is applying their search AI towards podcasts like they have for music. So maybe something like that in the future can help. But for me, I've done a lot of like social media marketing, interviews on other podcasts, and I have a small mailing list, but from the bands that I've been in, a lot of that fan base is kind of carried over because I do use a lot of music from my bands, which have, you know, somewhat of a following. We license a lot of our music for TV and film, so there's a lot of like other multimedia crossover. So yeah, I think if I was starting from like 0, it probably would stay right about 5 on a scale of 100. But since I had already somewhat of a a music following and a social media presence, it's kind of it's continuing to grow. So we're just now monetizing with ads, but they're good ads. Oh, there's the puppy. Hi, puppy.
That's my old dog that likes to shake up her ears. Got to shake when she wakes up.
Oh. I just lost my train of thought. Did I answer the
I can't
question?
imagine why. I'm in a hotel room with 3 dogs for those that were not here before we hit record, which is everybody. So it's a little bit of an adventure this week. But yeah, it seems like, do you find it hard at all that you're kind of trying to market the podcast and market the book?
Yeah.
Like, there's no category for you either way. So it's
Yeah.
all, like you said, social
Well,
media stuff.
yeah, there is. I mean, audio fiction stuff like Serial and This American Life and Lore, which are, some fact-based stuff, are pretty popular. They also have, the NPR muscle behind them and huge, traditional radio muscle. But I think, especially in England, like dramas are still very popular, and they're getting more popular. So there's a whole movement of audio drama producers that use like a hashtag audio drama Sunday, that kind of make an event out of it when new audio dramas come out. So there's a community that I'm involved with, that we're all trying to help each other. But as far as like how that dovetails into book sales, I'm still figuring out. I do a lot of conventions, comic conventions, and shows with my band. I actually sell a lot at bars, which is funny, like physical books at bars, because you don't see that like at a bar gig with a rock and roll band. And
That's where the truckers hang out.
that's right. That's my next. I want to start flyering truck stops, although that sounds very creepy when you say it out loud. But I think there's a whole group of truckers in Australia that somehow found the show and love it. So I have international following. So it's very niche, but that's where there's riches and niches. So I don't know.
Yeah, sometimes it does take a longer build when you're just trying to get people into something that it's not to market. There's not a category. They don't know yet they want it. You have to but that's great when you have something free like the podcast, that they can try it for free. And I always wonder if podcast listeners are more likely to become audiobook buyers rather than buy the ebooks, or maybe they pick up
Right.
both.
Yeah, and that's kind of the idea with the different versions. So like I censor the podcast, but I censor it in a cute way. Like when Ace curses, it's a truck horn. So he does, and like everybody, there's a talking dog, of course, who is very filthy mouth, and when he curses, it's just a bark. So it's done in like a cheeky, cutesy way. But then the audio, the pay version, which is available on my website, and also on Audible, is like full-blown dirty words for all you sickos out there. So it gives people options. But yeah, side loading audio sometimes is hard, just like side loading ebooks. So sales through my website are mostly physical books and the merchandise, like trucker hats. I got Ace Tucker Space Trucker hats, because why not tie that in?
You gotta have the merchandise. Have you been paying attention at all to, like, I know most of our podcast listeners come through iTunes, and as much of an Apple person as I am, I hate their search in their store and all their searches for everything. I shop, all my ebooks come from Amazon because I just can't find what I want there. But are you seeing, like, I actually just got asked if our podcast is in Google Play, and it's not, so I got to go look and figure out how to put that on there. Do you think that it seems like there's more coming online with audiobooks and podcasts outside of the Apple iTunes store? Have you seen any luck yet anywhere else?
Yeah, there actually most of my plays obviously come from Apple Music, iTunes, but then Stitcher is the next biggest one, and then Google Play after that. So I think Yeah, especially like Android, because Android's getting more of a market share and they don't have iTunes on there. That Google Play's their option, but apps like Stitcher and Podbean and different aggregators kind of offer a somewhat different experience, and that they're definitely viable. So it's kind of like that's the going wide in the podcast world, is trying to figure out how to aggregate to all those different podcatchers, and because eventually iTunes is still the big dog, but they're not going to be like, I don't know. They'll be the big dog forever, but the other ones are still very important. So I would, yeah. Who do you host the podcast through?
We're on Libsyn.
Okay, yeah, Libsyn.
Yeah.
They got good tech support. Just ask them how to get it on Google Play.
Well, it's just put your feed in. I just looked it up,
Yeah.
but I got to add some tags or something so that I'll take it.
Yeah, it's pretty easy. Yeah, Libsyn is great. Good folks over there.
Yeah. All right. So, like, obviously, the hosts of this show have got some experience with podcasts, but I don't think any of us have any experience with fiction podcasts. So, one question that I would have is, what is a good length for an episode of a fiction podcast?
I think personally, treat it like a sitcom. That's 26 minutes, under 30 minutes is a good length. I've heard longer, but I think it's hard to keep people's attention, I think, for that long, unless it's very, very engaging. So I would think, that's my hard, fast rule is 30 minutes, treat it like a sitcom, do like a 3-act structure, and keep it moving, because most people are consuming the audio on the go. They want something that's contained and in a nice little packet. So I would say the shorter the better. But I don't know. I bet something like an hour and 20 minutes might be like a movie. That would be interesting to try. Maybe let's try it. Me and you, Joe. Let's
Sure, why not? I want to say that, you will often hear that the best thing to do is to keep it under the length of the average commute, since the average person is listening to this sort of thing during a commute.
Yeah.
But if let's say you're shooting for the 26 minutes or whatever, an hour and 20, whatever it is, that seems like then you can't sort of make this decision after the fact. You're going to have to structure episodes pretty specifically in order to hit those marks and have the right pace and have the right transition. So would you say this is a thing where if you're going to do it, you have to make a project specifically for it?
Yeah, I kind of go by like the screenwriting rule of thumb, where it's like a minute per page. So if you write and you format it like on standard screenwriting format, or use what I use, which is half-ass screenwriting format, because I don't do anything properly. If you have those margins set and with the spacing right, and then if you read it out loud as you're going, you definitely want to have it on paper is close to what you think the finished product is going to be ahead of time. I ran into one issue with the novel, because I was cutting up chapters to fit in these small chunks, where I had to take a very long chapter and kind of cut it in half. So I kind of learned from that mistake. So now when I'm doing like more standalone stories following an overall season arc, I kind of have a rhythm. It's more of a natural rhythm that as I'm writing, I can feel out. But yeah, basically, once I'm up to like the 26 page mark, I'm like, okay, this is probably about where it needs to be. And then you go in and edit and tighten it up from there to make sure that it fits that. And then, if it's a little short, you just put an extra long music cue in there. Boom, you're done. So.
All right. So go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's where the being able to compose music on the fly can come in handy as well. So
I can only imagine. Okay, so my question for you is, like, for those of us listeners out there that were thinking, you know what, I might want to give this a try. Can you actually describe what software you use to to edit, trim your files down?
Yeah.
Like, for instance, your microphone there, I see that's a really, for those of us that can see you, you have a decent little microphone right there. Like, what hardware do you recommend, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I have kind of mine is I would say a mid-range setup, but you don't have to be this fancy. Like this is a Shure SM7B. It's the microphone Michael Jackson recorded Thriller with, but it's a very good like radio mic as well. I use Pro Tools, but you could very easily use something like Audacity to do a multi-track recorder. Audacity is free. Pro Tools has free versions, but to get the functionality, you kind of, now they're on a subscription model. I think it's a couple $100 a year. There are some very affordable audio interfaces. So you could probably, for under like, say, I would say under $200, you could, and a computer, obviously you need the computer, but as far as the external stuff, you could get an audio interface and a decent mic like a Shure SM58, which is like about $90 and about $100 interface, and which usually comes with digital audio workstation software, and you could be on the races. There's a lot of free sound effects available. I do a lot of custom creation, but I also have libraries that I've leased or licensed and use some free ones. What I'm really interested in, and maybe if there's any entrepreneurs out there who want to get with me on this one, is something like Spotify, but for sound effects. Something that where you could, and this may exist, I don't even know, but it would be cool if you like paid like a monthly fee and just had a library of all the sound effects you could ever want. But that's more on my list.
They've got it for pictures. You'd think they'd have it for sound.
Yeah, it's got to be out there. I kind of use what I have because for speed's sake, like I could fall down that rabbit hole of research, and I'm like, oh, geez, 8 hours went by. I haven't edited anything, So
I've been doing a search for a damn car revving engine noise.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. But yeah, I've been actually thinking about maybe doing like a short, like a teachable class on DIY audio creation. I'm going to do a seminar at a comic convention next year and see how it goes. But again, that's so niche. Like, I'm going to spend like 100 hours creating this course for like 3 guys, and 3 guys and Jeff are going to be interested in this. So,
but I was going to say, my question is, if somebody doesn't have any experience in this whatsoever, what sort of learning curve is involved? I mean, is this stuff easy to figure out, or do you need like a good solid background in computers, do you think?
I would think, yeah, you would probably need some basic audio editing skills, but there's plenty of free resources out there. Just like for music, YouTube searches are great. There is a website called therecordingrevolution.com who teaches you everything from how to record your band with one microphone to how to use any digital audio workstation. Most of this stuff is free on YouTube. But yeah, there's a little bit of a learning curve just to learn the stuff, but it's all out there, and a lot of it's free. So if you're interested, or yeah, I'm open to questions. You can email me. I'm available. But yeah, you definitely like. I would say, like, if you were motivated, you could probably spend like a week learning some stuff, and then you'd be good to go, because it's really not all that complicated. But maybe I'm deluding myself, because it still takes me 40 hours to do a 20-minute episode. So yeah, I don't know. It's all about the effort.
I've heard from audiobook narrators, that it can take like 8 hours to produce an hour, and those guys are professionals with and they're not doing the music and that stuff, but just for reading the book.
Yeah.
But I will say, for those that are interested but don't want to do it themselves because they don't want to spend the time, or they don't, a lot of authors were introverts with the idea of using your own voice and speaking your own story and putting it out there is very scary. A lot of folks now are not going exclusive with Audible when they're doing their audiobooks, if you're having them produced with a narrator, because, we had like Will from Find Away Voices on a couple months ago, and there's a lot of new players coming on. So my most recent series, I didn't, it's not exclusive. So I could go in and chop up the chapters. It wouldn't be quite what you're doing, because you're really tailoring it. When I did this before, I did it my first 3 Emperor's Edge books through Audiobooks. So they've disappeared, and they were hosting them. So I'm sure they're not out there anymore. I should re-upload them. But it was just chapters, she was reading the chapters. It was basically the audiobook chopped up. And I found that I did get people and they bought the ebooks because I only had 3 audiobooks out. and it was like an 8-book series. So that's what you should do, is just
Yeah.
publish the first 2 books and then leave them hanging so they're forced to go buy the ebooks. That was kind of an accidental thing, but just some thoughts.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And yeah, I kind of shot myself in the foot by going with ACX for the uncensored, full-blown, non-podcast version, because I didn't know about Findaway Voices until I was locked into that exclusive Audible contract, and I hate myself for it, and I'm trying to get out of it. But all the new stuff will be available through Findaway, through their aggregator, but it's free. But it's just different. My philosophy is put it out everywhere you can, because people are going to find it through these different stores that aren't going to find it through iTunes because the search is so crappy. But maybe they'll find it through, some other audiobook, or like something like Hoopla, or any of the other audio services that are available to libraries. That's a good place to get your stuff. So I say put it everywhere you can that's contractually allowed.
Right. And there's nothing wrong with the first book being free. I do wonder if the whole series being free is, if you're going to do a second series and have that non-free, I feel like you do have to have a monetization strategy at some point. Although I noticed you're getting into Patreon, so maybe that would be viable at some point.
That's kind of the experiment now, is because now I'm not really sure what if this, what I'm calling the second season, is going to wind up being the second novel in the series, or if this is all like supplemental vignettes running up to the full-blown novel. So I got to kind of have horse blinders on right now to produce the audio fiction, and kind of worry about that later once I come up for air. But yeah, I think this is my odd way of mailing list building but building it in an ass backwards way through the podcast. So I'll let you know in a little bit, but so far people seem to be digging it, and I am running ads now. So a little bit is coming in through that, and a little bit's coming in through Patreon. So one day we'll see.
It does seem that if you can hook people through the audio, especially if you're doing your own voice, that you get really loyal fans. Like I think almost all the people I support on Patreon are YouTubing or audiobooking. And I don't know, because you feel like really thankful and like them better than if you just read some random dude's book.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I don't take it real serious, obviously, because of the subject matter. So like, when I mess up, a lot of times I'll leave stuff in there because I think it makes it a little more human, and like people seem to like that. So, and then I'm trying to leave it all in the microphone. So yeah, hopefully people will get all warm and fuzzy with the things I'm sharing.
Sure. It's authentic and genuine, and everybody loves that.
Yes.
All right. So again, because I do a podcast, I know that there are stats to follow, and to some degree better stats than a lot of the ebook stuff. So do you follow the stats for your podcast?
Yeah, not as much as I should. So it started out, we're looking at a couple hundred downloads per episode. Now we're into the thousands, but not any. I know that like most average podcasts get about 140 downloads per episode, and I think the last episode, as of now, it came out 2 weeks ago, is sitting around 2,600. So not terrible, but not great. So I'm not Joe Rogan with podcasts, but there's a steady climb that keeps on going up. So, but I try not to obsess about it, because I don't want to get caught up in numbers versus just creating for creating's sake and trying to hope that people dig it. And but I watch, but not too bad, not too much. I'm not going to obsess.
That's probably for the best.
I'm watching my stats right now. Watching them. No.
Well, like, if you follow me on Twitter, you'll occasionally hear me just talk about, oh, today it's just going to be an F5 day. I'm just going to keep refreshing and find out how I did. But so you've done it now for long enough to have had like an entire arc go through, for example. Did you see anything like a drop off after an arc, or do you like that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's odd since the first season was completely serialized. There was a substantial drop off from the first 3 episodes. Well, it was a market drop off, but it wasn't substantial. All right, so it kind of went in half and then picked up again. So it kind of did a U. So for some reason, the like fourth and fifth episode kind of dropped, and then from 6 to 17 went up again. So I don't know if people just skipped those episodes or not. But with the second season, there's only been 2 episodes so far, but it's a steady climb back up. I did some bonus intermediary stuff like the Christmas special and some other goofy little things that were also staying pretty stable at the same level. That's one thing I do worry about because it went from a weekly show and then I took 6 months off and now it's a monthly show. I was worried that it was going to drop down to 0, but it hasn't. So I guess I'm beating the odds in that respect.
All right. So let me ask you, how often or do you ever seek to increase your subscribers? I mean, do you advertise? Do you guest host other podcasts? Seek out high profile guests? What do you do?
Yeah, so I hit my mailing list pretty regularly. I did do some advertising in the beginning. Right now, it's all social media and word of mouth. So I spent too much money on Facebook ads in the beginning, but I guess it got it out enough to get like the momentum to get it rolling. But right now I'm trying to curb those expenses because you can fall down a very expensive Facebook ad rabbit hole, which I do not want to do. But yeah, I'd be way into guest hosting. Anybody want me to host their show? Let me know. And as far as guests, since I do it all myself, I haven't done any guests, but I did just run a Patreon promotion on the month of October that if you joined at a certain level, that I would either portray you on an episode or develop a character with you or use your voice or like your likeness in an episode. And a couple of people went for that. One of them is actually a podcaster in Australia who's recording his own voice, which I'm really excited about because he's like, do you want me to crocodile hunter it up? And I'm like, yes, I want you to crocodile hunter it up. So that'll be fun. So this will be a first time that another voice is going to appear on the show. So based on that, which that's going to come out next month, if that'll probably be something that I'll do a couple times a year to keep it more interesting. And then in the back of my mind, I'm going to do the Ace Tucker Space Trucker musical, and that I'm going to need help with. So if you guys want parts in that, I'll let you.
Musical as in, are you going to hire some singers or are you going to take a stab at it yourself?
No, yeah, I'm going to do it all myself. Well, there will probably be other singers as well, but since I'm a singer in my own band, but I'm more of a yeller than a singer. But I want to do like a full-on Broadway style show, but in audio form. So there's going to be full orchestration, maybe even some tap dancing sound effects, but more like Rocky Horror Picture Show kind of rock and roll, rock opera kind of thing. That I think that's going to have to be next year, not 2020, because that's going to be a crazy amount of work, and I will need help with that. But I have a lot of musician friends, so I'm going to probably have to tap them for that. Now that I don't know how I'm going to put on Amazon other than audio, but I guess the libretto I could print that as an ebook. I don't know. We'll find out.
It is interesting that ebooks almost seem secondary to you, and you're really into the podcasting. And I think that it's great now. There are so many potential ways you can actually make money. I feel like for the longest time, podcasting was just like you could run some ads, you could sell some Casper mattresses, but that was about all they had out there. So with Patreon and Kickstarter too, it's actually possible to do storytell in other ways and not just focus on selling ebooks.
Yeah, and that's what interests me the most. I mean, I've been writing my whole life, but I wanted to do something a little more than just words, something with sound. I've always been interested in sound and music. So I think now is a pretty neat time because podcasts are so popular and audiobooks are so popular that this is kind of a fun time for like old timey radio to come back. So with space truckers.
Yeah, maybe Apple will actually put a category in there too in their podcast. I haven't searched in the store for a long time, like drilled down. I usually just search from my phone within the app.
Mm-hmm.
But it would certainly be nice if you could drill down free, podcast fiction,
Yeah.
science fiction, and people could find you that way. I feel like you're actually doing pretty good, it sounds like, with subscribers for a little niche thing.
Yeah.
But you could really blow up if, you could be on the front page of a category there.
Yeah. So Apple, listen to Lindsay and make that happen. Thank you.
And while you're at it, if you could fix the TV show and music surfing so I don't have to make sure I have the correct thing clicked before I do my search. Just give me all the results for everything like you used to.
Just read my brain, read my mind,
Yes,
give me what I
do it
want.
right. Last question for me. You mentioned a little bit you tried conventions, I think.
Mm-hmm.
What did you try? Where were you trying to sell books there, or were you trying to get the word out about the podcast?
Yeah, both. So I do comic book conventions because I've written comic books. My band, Red Hot Rebellion, has 2 albums out and both come with comic books. So we've been doing conventions now since about 2012. Comic book conventions, mostly around the Midwest because we're based out of north of Cincinnati. And the when Ace Tucker Space Trucker launched, I had a lot of free swag to give out, and then some links to download free stuff, to listen to it, and then promotional stickers. And then trucker hats. Once the show kicked off, then I would sell other merchandise, and people who don't even know about the show were just like, "Wow, that's a cool looking trucker hat. I want that trucker hat." So, yeah, it's kind of like it's like a little tap dancing, come look at me, check out my stuff. But so for an introvert, it's terrible. But they're fun because you can talk to people face to face, and a lot of people have come onto the podcast and bought the novel from that. Like I said, most of the physical book sales I've made are at shows, and more so than through the website or through online stores. So in that respect, they're a lot of fun. And in the novel itself, there's download links to get a full album of music that was used in the podcast. There's all kinds of other fun stuff. So it's trying to tie in, like, no matter which version you get, there's some kind of other tie-in that I'm trying to give you, whether it's the physical book, an ebook, the audio book, the ear comic. I'm working on a real comic, but those are a pain in the ass. Making comic books is hard. But yeah, one day I would like to see a full graphic novel and then the musical. So we're gonna
Man,
hit it on.
I gotta say, like when people start making a list of the things they can turn their book into, you've added like 6 to that list that we have not really discussed before. Musical, I don't think has been discussed at all. My last question actually has already been answered, so I have a different question instead. We talk about how like you had it weekly and then monthly. Podcasts in particular are very sensitive to changing the release schedule, and if you miss a week or something like that, it can have a disproportionate impact. Have you thought of this sort of thing where, like, if I'm because you hear about anthology books and anthology shows, sort of Twilight Zone style, where the same podcast feed would be able to, on alternate months or weeks or however, release other people's stuff. Like, it seems like this is ripe for a collaboration and sort of untapped in that regard.
Yeah, that would be a really neat idea. I am part of like an audio network, the Odd Audio Network, where we kind of promote each other's work, but it isn't on one set feed. It would be kind of cool to have a set feed like that. I'm sure there is what's it called? There's something called the Audio Drama Something or Other podcast. I can't remember the name of it, but they do something similar to that, where they'll take episodes of other people's shows and then basically rerun them on their feed to great success, although not so successful that I can remember their name. But that's just because I have a crappy memory. It's not because the show's terrible. But yeah, I would be really interested in that. But since it's all a time issue for me, so if I could, I would put out an episode every day. But that's crazy. But I guess if I did, like, no, I'm thinking about it, maybe something like 10 minutes, kind of like an Adult Swim style thing. if that was my full-time gig, I could do it, Joe. Let's make it happen.
All right. So for my last question, I'm going to ask you, for all the viewers and listeners out there that have ever considered starting their own podcast, has there been anything that you found surprisingly challenging or difficult?
Yeah, learning how to learning the how podcasts wind up on someone's phone was a little challenging at first. But thankfully someone clued me into Libsyn, and all their tech support and tutorials was real great on understanding that. But yeah, the metadata and compression rates and data storage capacity, it can be a little overwhelming because there's so many variables, but since there's so many podcasts now and so many people doing them, that there's a wealth of information out there. Just by do your Googling and you can find out just about anything. But I would say if you're interested in doing a podcast, do it, see what happens, but stick with it for a little while, because most people give up after 2 or 3 times, because they don't have like Joe Rogan numbers, but no one does. That guy's nuts. So I would say just, yeah, put it out there, see, and stick with it. It doesn't have to be fancy. Most podcasts don't sound real great either. Mine does, but most don't. So you just, put it out there and see what happens. Is my advice to you.
Yeah, some lazy sci-fi fantasy authors sometimes don't even edit their shows, so it's
I
a
envy
miracle
that.
that people will listen.
Envy the fact that you guys just put it up there and with no editing. That's amazing. I wish I could.
Well, it becomes so much more of a time commitment if you're actually making it really professional, which I am very pleased when ones I listen to are like that. But at the same time, it's free. So if you don't like it, go get your free information somewhere else.
What do you want from free? Yeah.
No, but we're all busy writing, so it's just I'm proud that we've kept it going for 200 episodes.
Yeah, that's amazing.
But why don't you finish up by letting folks know where they can find you, and let them know if you're working on anything new, or definitely how to subscribe to the podcast.
Yeah, so just do a Google search for Ace Tucker Space Trucker, and you will find the audio fiction podcast available on all your favorite podcatchers, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, all the rest of them. You can find me at acetuckerspacetrucker.com. Also on Instagram and Twitter at SolidJim, SOLIDJIM. And look out for my rock and roll band, Red Hot Rebellion, at redhotrebellion.com. Yow!
All right, I will try to get all those in the show notes for episode 207. And thank you for joining us and for talking about something a little different today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. And Joe, you hit me up when you're ready to do that musical. I'm your Huckleberry.
Will do. All right.
All right. Thanks, guys.
everyone.
So long, everybody.
Bye-bye.